2019, Sunless Sea and Fallen London developer Alexis Kennedy was accused by two women of inappropriate behavior. These accusations ranged from infidelity and a bad temper to preying on young women trying to get a foothold in the industry. I spoke with Alexis Kennedy and his partner, Lottie Bevan, on the second episode of my Diabolical podcast. I wanted to get their side of the story, not because I am taking sides in this story, but simply because I think it's important that we continue to hold on to an attitude of innocent until proven guilty. And in this story, researching this story, I could find no proof that even an investigation was carried out into the validity of these allegations. I'm not saying that the allegations are false or that they are lies, simply that I don't know, and nobody seems to actually know. The only people who know are the accuser and the accused. No journalists or reporters took the time to uncover any evidence or of the validity of these allegations. And so we're left with a he said, she said. And unfortunately, as is often the case these days, the accused was judged fairly harshly in the court of public opinion, despite there being no hard evidence that these accusations were actually true. So I wanted to talk with Alexis and Lottie, get their side of the story, let them say their piece, and let listeners and readers make up their own minds. So without further ado, Alexis, Lottie, welcome to Diabolical, and thank you for being on. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, I think things are good. I mean, we have our day-to-day life is actually really rather excellent. We run a small, battered but successful business. We have two cats we adore. No, we have two cats Lottie adores,
He
and
does
I like,
too.
and I have a child around somewhere.
And we've been very fortunate in games to kind of sail out a lot of the pain of COVID.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you know, games have been weirdly kind of buoyant in the COVID pandemic because obviously everyone at home is very bored, and that means they play more games. So hooray, sad face.
Yeah. And because we're both basically, well, I'm an introvert who hates people, and Lottie, would you describe yourself as an introvert who hates people?
Not publicly.
Okay. Well, I'm an introvert who hates people, and Lottie is a woman of restraint, tact, and diplomacy. So lockdown's been relatively easy on us. My kid, who's 11, really struggled because she just started at a new school, and having to work from home and not seeing her friends and things is rough. But please,
how's it been on your end?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've worked from home for like a decade, so for me, it wasn't a huge adjustment. But yeah, for the kids, because I have a soon-to-be 11-year-old and a soon-to-be 14-year-old, so for them it was tricky. But yeah, no, and I think like a lot of people, for me it was like way more alcohol than I should ever possibly consume, and generally all the good things at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, man, I should start jogging all the time and like get in really good shape, because it looks like this virus kills people who are, who have high blood pressure and all that. But yeah, it just didn't really turn out that way.
What was the phrase about lockdown drinking that one of your friends used?
Which one?
I can't remember. This. If you can't remember, it's no good. But some a witty way of describing like the lockdown diet.
I can't remember. Sorry.
But yeah, I know. It's just that every day is the same as the last, right? It becomes a little bit harder to keep habits, and some days you can't even remember whether it's this day or the last.
But nearly over.
Nearly over.
Yes. Did you guys get vaccinated? I'm in Arizona. So,
oh right, okay.
Yeah. So kind of I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is like a college mountain town. So we're up at we're pretty close to the Grand Canyon, up in the mountains. So
can confirm, very beautiful.
Lottie's a big Grand Canyon fan. She lived in America for the first.
For a bunch of times, lived in Washington, went to Phoenix, Arizona, but never your part of Arizona. Yeah. Lived in Cambridge, MA for a bit.
Cool. So Washington State?
No, DC.
Okay, cool. I've never been to DC. Isn't that strange?
I left when I was 8, so I don't feel I'm like a reliable source, but I had a great time there when I was a kid.
I've been to London for a couple days on our way to Ireland, but we stayed down in Soho, and it was it was so. I would just been to Paris before that, and it was just like I wanted to get out of London so badly because it was just
Oh
so
no.
crowded and loud. I know. I had been in too much of an urban environment. And the hotel we had was super tiny, and both my girlfriend and I are very tall, so we were just like. But London is cool. I want to explore it more when I have.
It is, but I support people's. I support people hating London. I grew up in Oxford, which is very small, very beautiful, very quiet, relatively speaking, and I hated London for that first 5 years I was here, and then after that, it's just like when I first came here, somebody said, I said to somebody, but it's so noisy, it's so dirty, it's so unfriendly, it's so expensive. Do you stop noticing that? And they thought about it a bit and they said, no, you just sort of stop caring. And that's kind of how it is. The world's like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think
So-
you didn't do us any favors by visiting Paris first. That's cheating.
No.
Yeah, and then we were in Barcelona before that, so that was a cool trip. But that's my only European adventure. So I thought maybe we could, maybe you guys could just each introduce yourselves, just talk a little bit about, your how you got started in the game industry, and we'll go from there.
Shall I go first?
You go first.
So I'm Alexis Kennedy. I've been making games for 12 years. I get asked how I got into games, and it's really not a helpful story. I was 37. I had a 6-month pregnant wife. I had to take I didn't have to take. I chose to take an unpaid sabbatical from work because I thought this is my last opportunity if I'm going to go and make games to do it before my kid's born and all my priorities change. So with almost no money and almost no time and an incoming daughter, I sat down and I wrote and coded a game called Fall in London. And I got a friend of my wife's actually then in to do the art. And then we scraped along the bottom like an airplane trying to take off from too small an airfield, probably with Nazis chasing it for the first 3-4 years. Never quite made enough money to get by. And then suddenly we made Sunless, our first actual video game, which was a legitimate minor indie hit. And suddenly Fell Better went from being a broke startup to being a successful small studio. And then put a pin in it there because I met Lottie. Do you want to do that, or shall we? Shall I be on to the rest? I'll do the rest and then talk about you. So after 7 years, I decided I was running a studio of 15 people, 17 people, and I realised I'd got into games to do design and writing, and I was doing almost none of that. So I went Ronin, and I left Fell Better. I sold my shares in the company, and I spent a year doing freelance work for BioWare, Telltale, Paradox, some other NDA stuff. And then I made a game called Cultist Simulator. And then we should talk about Lottie.
So sadly, my story pales in comparison. I grew up watching my dad play games. Grew up before my sexual awakening thinking Lara Croft was pretty cool, and she is still pretty cool, but it's not the 90s anymore, people, so we need a new thing.
I believe you met the founder of the ex-president of Eidos once on a train.
I did.
And he apologised to you for Lara Croft.
He was totally gentlemanly and great, mainly because I didn't know who he was, which I think he found quite refreshing. And I did English at uni, which was brilliant in lots of ways, but is dreadful for job prospects. So basically sort of like kind of bollocks my way into the games industry as a producer. And I worked in some pretty interesting, tiny indie companies who've been run in some pretty fascinating ways, and ended up joining Fell Better because with my English background, I found their narrative games really interesting, which turned out you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked at Fell Better as a producer for a couple of years, and then I hopped ship to co-found Web Factory with AK.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm a producer, marketer, and inexplicably artist, which is very refreshing.
I often describe Lottie's main ability as constructive irritation, which is to say that anytime she's not good at something, she gets really cross. So she works really hard to make sure I stay out of the room while she's swearing, and then I'll sort of come back in a month and she'll be good at it. She's done
But we can't describe
Yeah,
it
we
because
can't
this is an audio
Yeah.
podcast. So talking about art you can't see is probably the least
She's
interesting.
designing so Weather Factory, where we're just the two of us. We were slightly more for a while, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But we're just the two of us, and planning to be just the two of us indefinitely. We made Cultist Simulator, again, a legitimate minor indie hit, I think is the best way to describe it. It wasn't Stardew Valley, but it has, 750,000 installs or something?
It has changed our life.
Yeah. And the way I've always worked is designing settings and games and stories that people sort of like wrapping themselves up and rolling around in and unpicking all the bits of. And so Cultist Simulator was like that. And we've got a whole bunch of ancillary stuff like a tarot deck that we sell based on the secret gods in the game, and Lottie's designing another one which is astonishing and is made of translucent PVC, so it looks like stained glass. First time I think that's ever been done.
Apparently I expect the internet to correct this, but yeah, first time.
Cool.
So shall I talk about the reason we're doing this interview, or do you want to ask me questions that I'll respond to about that?
Great.
In
terms
of no, go ahead. Why are we doing this interview?
So because you're I don't know, how would you describe your podcast? Countercultural, independent, difficult.
It's so funny.
Troublemaking.
The culture shifts all the time, and the way it's shifted lately has been strange and peculiar. So I guess I am a little counterculture. And I guess that is, I think that we see in our culture lately just a lot of I mean, I know that the phrase cancel culture is sort of used broad strokes wise, but I think there is a lot of this sort of strange bullying and canceling and blacklisting that goes on, and it's really bad in the games industry. I mean, I think I've been blacklisted in the games industry for at least 6 or 7 years now. So
you got seniority.
I mean, just for almost nothing, but that people don't particularly like me, I guess.
It's because you've reached The Walking Dead, isn't it, Erik?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's all the mean things I've said about Carol in The Walking Dead. No, I think for me, actually, it was trying when Gamergate happened, when that was going on, I tried to cover that sort of from a consumer first standpoint, which is kind of what I've always done, is look at consumer rights. Why are why are gamers upset? What's going on here? And of course, if you do that, then you're a misogynist and a sexist and
unclean,
an abuser and all those things. So people have said I'm one of the co-founders of the alt-right, which is hilarious to me, considering my long history of voting for Democrats.
I mean, no wonder you're so rich. Richard Spencer's like licensing the terms off you, presumably.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me and Richard Spencer, best buddies. Oh my god. But yeah, it's funny because of course I'm a lefty and I have no fondness for any sort of white supremacy or anything like that. But this is how it goes. So yeah, you've got kind of a crazy story of your own.
We do.
What's happened there? What's the backstory here?
So shall I start with the backstory or shall I start with 2019?
I would do an
overview. So the overview is that we were in 2019, late 2019, Lottie and me, at the top of the wheel. We had we'd brought out Cultist Simulator. We'd done the first round of DLC, which had been very successful. We decided we were going to make a new game about a library, which had a lot of buzz. We'd grown the studio from 2 to 5 people. And because Lottie had for a long time been a big proponent of feminism in games, we were that rare thing, majority female studio.
Very proud of that.
And we just won a whole bunch of awards. And then a tornado came down. And the tornado was that I was accused on Twitter of being an abuser. And I was accused by 2.5 people. And the story got legs because it was the same time as a couple of other big names got called out for being, air quotes, abusers. And so it was described.
It was a bit of a moment.
Yeah, it was a moment, and nobody wanted to know the details. I was an abuser and I was a bad guy, and
well,
and that was
specifically,
it.
you were accused of leveraging your position as CEO of a company to basically get women to sleep with you.
Yeah. So again,
and just to be clear, before we move forward,
Yeah.
that didn't happen, and AK said it didn't happen at the time and wrote at length about what actually happened. But,
so I think it's worth saying. When I say I was called out on Twitter, what actually happened was an anonymous Twitter account popped up and started making allegations about me, and that was sufficiently weird that it didn't get any traction, although it was quite unpleasant. And that happened on my daughter's 10th birthday.
And to be clear, the allegations that the anonymous account was saying were things like hands up anyone who's gone round to AK's house for cocktails, which is not, your New York Post headline crime.
No. And then the anonymous account went away because it wasn't getting any traction. And then there was something of a. Does coordinated assault sound too paranoid? It does, doesn't it?
It does. I don't think it. I think it was a more free for all.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was spontaneous, but I got one person making accusations, a lot of retweets, and then another person making accusations. And here's what I was actually accused of and what I actually did. So I had sex twice with Meg Giant in 2011, 8 years before any accusations were made, back when she was a producer at the BBC and I was running Felt Better at that point. It was 5-6 people and we had no money. So there wasn't any power differential. She wasn't working for me. It was all 100% consensual. And the other thing I did was I hired somebody who I was already occasionally sleeping with. And then later on, Lottie and I fell in love and I broke things off with her and I and she was hurt and it was tricky. But we kept working together for another 6 months before I left the company. And that's literally it. That's, I think, everything. And if you go online and search my name, you can find people say that I'm a sex pest, that I'm a rapist, that I'm a sexual abuser.
It's so horrible.
And it's hard even to say I've never been accused of being a rapist. It sounds like I've never been accused of being a rapist. What I mean is, I've been accused of being a rapist. People say, oh, he's a wrong one, he's a sex pest. And then if asked exactly what, they're a bit, you're not standing up for an abuser, are you? And at the time when it happened, I think it got more traction because Alec Kolovka and Jeremy Soule, both of whom are sort of bigger names than me, were. I was very much the runt of the litter. Were also attacked online,
and for more serious things. Both of them were accused of variants. Of
I want to
assault.
make it clear they were accused, and we're not.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm just saying that's why I think that your narrative has changed quite a lot since the original accusations, because you're kind of lumped in.
But again, you'd be amazed to hear that my experience made me more sceptical of claims that are made about other people.
Yeah,
so.
me too.
And Alec, of course, killed himself. So I'm particularly keen not to blacken his name any further.
No.
But at the time, a whole bunch of people said, yes, I've been hearing stories about Alexis for years. And I was accused, what was the phrase? A multitude of women?
Something like that.
Uncountable women, dozens of young women. And the idea was that I sort of hung around games conferences.
And you jumped out of bushes at young women.
Yeah, or I invited them back to my room and said, hey, I think I can get you a poorly paid writing gig for my 6-person indie studio. Do you want to do the thing?
Yeah. And that didn't ever happen.
And then that didn't happen.
And nobody ever said that happened.
Yeah.
There was sort of the actual accusations about him using his position of power, which are untrue. And then there was a sort of secondary story that took on a life of its own, which has no bearing on any reality or any specific allegations at all. That you're just kind of a skank, and that your career has basically been about picking up girls, and that you're just a bad guy.
And the reason that you were running feminist initiatives, and the reason that we at Weather Factory were doing mentorship for new indies, and the reason that I used to respond to people who mailed me and asked for help, and the reason that when I was at Fail Better that we founded an initiative called Fund Better that gave money to, no, to be fair, lent money to indies, indie fund style, and the fact that at Fail Better I instituted a scheme where everybody was paid at least 32 grand as a minimum decent
yeah,
wage.
I remember the day you told us about that. That was great.
And at Fail Better, in the first 7 years of its life, exactly one person resigned. That's because he got a dream job in the US, which is a turnover you don't get in the States. All that was a cover. And you should be more suspicious of me because we did those things, because it was all just me covering up my habit of jumping out of bushes. But I think you said nobody ever said, and it's worth getting to that, because the other half of this is the effect it's had in your life. And I've always said that this was an attack as much on Lottie as on me. Lottie thinks I'm probably being a little bit paranoid about that, but certainly she suffered. And certainly, I think the thing is, I was apparently jumping out of bushes at yawning, but nobody ever saw fit to mention this to you.
Yeah, I mean, so I knew immediately that there was something hinky going on, because I have, at the time, had been monogamously dating Alexis for something coming up on 5 years. So, you know, we lived together, we worked together. If he were doing anything sneaky, the chances are that I would have had some inkling that was going on, even if I didn't know all of it. And I had also worked at the ex-company Fail Better, where all of this took place, and I had also worked with the two women who specifically said negative things about you, and I was fully aware of the context and the relationships going on there. So I knew there was something more to the story when it came out, but ostensibly it was it was trying to protect women from people like Alexis. That was the sort of stated reason for this all happening on social media and being so cataclysmically awful. It was a kind of idea that, well, it is awful for you guys and your business might well suffer and you might kill yourselves, but we're doing this because we have to protect women, which you know, great. I'm pro protecting women. That's a good thing. But then it became apparent that I was also under attack, and I had been a prominent feminist in the industry. I'd won some major awards. I was quite well known for being quite outspoken and protective of women in lots of ways. And very, very quickly that changed. And I have now too become a monster. And I have been abuser. Everything. Well, an abuser specifically, according to one of Alexis's particular detractors. For no reason given, I just am. And I'm a bad feminist, and I'm a woman shield. And my career, even more than Alexis's...
Grima Wormtongue.
I'm Grima Wormtongue. That's a classic. One of... my career has been a total front for Alexis's to cover up his evil misogynist deeds, despite the fact that doesn't stand up to any scrutiny at all, and I find that really insulting. But yeah, so this has expanded from specific allegations of a bad character on Alexis's part to Lottie and Alexis eat babies for breakfast, and anyone who talks about them should also be banned.
I think it's worth being specific. So no, I don't think anyone's actually said we eat babies for breakfast, but they have said that you're a racist.
Oh yeah, I'm a racist. My family are awful.
Your family are aristocrats, apparently.
Yeah, and I was brought up in the Raj, so that's why I'm India. Super racist. Yeah. Despite the fact that I'm not that old.
And I'm a drunk.
Oh yeah, you were drunk.
You were drunk. I made a cocktail on stage at GDC and back in 2017, and this was because I was secretly drugging women's drinks, and I was using.
Not, it's like that. To be clear, you were never accused of that. There was sort of a suggestion that you're kind of
there was one person said, well, you know, I had a drink with him, and he was drinking a transparent liquid, and he said it was gin, but who knows? It might have been water.
It was definitely gin. To be clear, this man has a serious. But I think
it's a gin problem for me.
Collection, darling, collection. And the way this manifests to stop our tiny violins is 2 years on from this stuff, which came out of nowhere and, you know, was just cataclysmic, as we said. We still get a very small rump of people who will still appear out of relatively nowhere. You know, when we're just doing our day-to-day stuff, we don't see horrible stuff, although we really don't go looking. But if we launch a game, if we get any press coverage, if we do anything remotely financially positive for this company, we see people still actively emailing distribution platforms to tell them to take us down. We get people saying you can't feature these people. We know that we have been blacklisted by a lot of the press. Which I think
again, we have been explicitly blacklisted by 2 or 3 people who've told us they blacklisted us, and a whole bunch of others just don't reply to our mails anymore.
Well, yeah, and that's a slightly more complicated situation. But yeah, so we're still very much feeling the ramifications from this. And behind the scenes, we've been trying to do our best to be sensible and to try and resolve it, because obviously, like, it sucks for us and it's horrible. But I imagine it sucks for everybody involved. I can't imagine anybody's really enjoying this. So all of the people involved in this are around Fail Better Games, AK's old studio, the one I used to work at. They're all
where we met and began a romance.
Yeah, which they knew about, but
Yeah.
but yeah. So all of this comes back fundamentally to Fail Better Games. So rather than approach individuals, because I'm aware that some people might perceive that as some sort of threat or whatever, which obviously we don't want to do, we decided to speak sort of politely and honourably to the company, where all of this coalesced, and suggest a variety of ways that we think we could resolve the problem and all move on with our lives. So that's things like we put in a request for various bits of information that have been used to suggest that we're bad people, which we know is taken out of context.
So things like our HR records or chat logs, which have either been taken out of context and misrepresented, or in some cases, I think, invented wholesale. But it's hard to tell because they won't let us see any of the records.
Yeah, they said no, and then they threatened to sue us. So that didn't go very well. So we said,
and they accused me of tweeting menacing poetry at the narrative director.
It's true. Yeah. And so we said, how about mediation? Because my personal view of this whole thing is it's rumours that have essentially got out of hand, and if anybody had spoken to anybody else at any point over the last 7 years, that none of us would be in this situation, because I'm sure it's crossed wires and miscommunication. So I know that if we sit down and talk to people, we can even everything out and like write some wrong ideas.
I think a lot of us would just be pissed off with a lot of the rest of us.
No, but that's why we're doing mediation, right? To be polite and positive, rather than just being like, well, you ruined my life for 2 years.
And that's the thing, you one of the problems with cancelling people is it works if you live in a society where you can imprison them or fire them into space or set fire to them. But we in a liberal democracy, we all have to live with the people we've cancelled. And I think a lot of the people who went after us sort of thought, we'd be wiped off the face of the earth. And I think they genuinely, after people sort of exploded in a shower of spite on social media, they weren't sure what to do next, and some were a bit abashed.
Well, because I think
we probably can work through it.
I'm sure that's true. So we're hoping that we can convince people to mediate with us, because we think that's just the best way forward. And so far, they have said no, but we're going to keep trying. And the last thing that we have suggested that we could think of that might resolve this in a sort of grown-up way, rather than slagging each other off on Twitter, which I'm not a fan of, is an independent investigation, because there are two conflicting narratives here. There's that Alexis was some sort of troll king for 7 years while he ran Fail Better.
And everyone was terrified of me.
And everyone was terrified of you, and you were hateful.
Yeah.
And then there's our narrative, which is backed up by facts, which is that isn't true. But we can't resolve that between the two sides of the dispute. So we suggested that Fail Better and By the Factory would both agree on a neutral third-party investigator, so there's no suggestion of bias or anyone being anyone's mate. We would jointly pay for it, so again, there was no undue pressure exerted on the person doing the report, and we would agree upfront to abide by whatever that report came back with, and we really agree with that. So we know that Alexis hasn't been horrible to people, but were a report to come back and say otherwise, if we had agreed that upfront, we would abide by it, because then at least we'd have like a kind of point of agreement. And equally, as you can imagine, they said no, and then called you names. So to date, we have not been super successful in convincing anyone to behave like an adult.
But I don't want to be Ducati about it, because honestly, I would quite like my life back, and I would like you to have your life back too. And I imagine that people over there are also quite fed up with having to field difficult questions.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I can't believe who would find this fun.
So I think, basically, if we sit down and talk about it, we could probably get out a joint statement together through gritted teeth and get the hell on with making games and
which is all we want.
Yeah.
So that's our sad tale.
Yeah. It's so crazy. So why do you think? I mean, this brings up so many questions. Really, I mean,
doesn't it?
What I mean. For one thing, I'm curious your experience when these I guess all the allegations were made on Twitter. Is that correct? Originally?
Yes.
Yeah.
All of them remain on social media.
Yeah.
It's a strange play. I've always been baffled by why people would, first of all, make accusations on Twitter rather than through a more official channel. But then this just got picked up by the gaming press. And what was your experience kind of like when the articles about this were being published, were you being contacted by journalists? Where did you feel like they were representing your side of the story, or was it mostly just sort of this snowballing rumor mill?
So, I mean, it was absolutely awful. It was hands down the worst experience of my life. You basically couldn't speak for several days because you were so crushed by the whole thing. And that's the time when journalists tend to get in touch with you, when you're at your most emotional and like, what the hell is going on? So it was an interesting experience in hindsight. I mean, when you see somebody accused of something nasty and their response in press, it tends to be quite anodyne and quite sort of corporate sounding. And I've always wondered about that. I've always thought, if that person isn't guilty, wouldn't they be like, for God's sake, I'm so innocent?
And the thing is, I wanted to go on Twitter right away.
Yeah, and I'm glad you didn't.
And I'm glad I didn't, because we got a piece of really useful advice up front, which made us rethink the whole situation, which was
from a PR specialist who we'd been like, help, what do we do? He said, you can't respond to individual allegations because it's on Twitter, so you just won't be able to see all of the individual stuff. And if you miss out any allegation, the implication is that you did do that one. So you'll hang yourself with your own rope if you try and respond individually right now. So the advice that people are given in a crisis like this, I now know, is give a really boring response initially. When the press come knocking, you don't say, here is my life story and here's why I didn't do it. You say, either I did do it and I'm sorry, or in our case, I absolutely didn't do it and we can prove it. But that's it. You don't give any juicy details. And I think journalists are disappointed by that because obviously they want a great story. But we were in no state to form sentences, never mind speak to the press about an incredibly sensitive topic that was all about our sex lives and our future. So our approach was basically to try not to kill ourselves for a couple of weeks, which we managed, hooray. And then when we were feeling a bit better, AK published a much longer blog post, which went through all the details of the allegations against him and said, I think you said that the thing you did feel bad about was dumping Olivia for me and then continuing to work with her, because that was just messy. And, you tried your best, but you copped to that and said that was just a screw up. But the other stuff, here it is in context, which is basically dating consensually around over a period of 10 years. And that has been portrayed as a sort of career of predation rather than what it is, which is a man like dating different people in games. That was how we dealt with the press. And I have no idea if we had done a different approach, if the press would have been kinder. I know that the press are just looking for a story. They're not necessarily trying to destroy either side of an argument. But I can tell you from personal experience of having the worst time of your life, being contacted by press is the worst possible time to have anything to say to them.
I think a lot of the press who did publish something about it at the time, and it was basically all the games press, I think the what's the phrase I'm looking for? I don't agree with everything that was written about us, but I think, given that it looked like a big story was breaking and I was going to turn out to be a monster and supposedly other dozens of women, I have sympathy with people who shot first and asked questions later.
That's a really good point, because a lot of the stuff that initially hit was a sort of intimation that there were lots of stories that were going to come out. And 2 years down the line, everyone knows what we know, which is that there are not lots of stories that are going to come out. It was all rumour mongering and kind of hysteria. And I totally can see a neutral journalist seeing those initial allegations and thinking, oh my gosh, we've got something really big here. And then that just not really happening.
I think there's journalists who added my reply as an update to the articles, and I think my response to those is more sympathetic to the journalists who let the original accusation stand without adding my response. To be fair, my response was 3 weeks after we were first approached for a comment. I was basically in bed crying, and Lottie had my phone, but we didn't give a statement. I think the other thing that I am disappointed by, and be very tactful about this. One of the 2 women who accused me of being, quote, an abuser, unquote, said I had been her manager for 2 years and I'd been in a relationship with her the whole time. And
you'd kept it secret.
And I kept it secret. And as I said in my blog post response, that's just flatly not true. We had an on-off thing long before the short period of time during which I was her manager.
And she wasn't in games originally.
And she wasn't in games originally when we met. There was no professional relationship when we first began our on-off thing. So the whole thing is skanky and silly, and I'll have more to say about my skanky silliness in a moment. But it just wasn't true that I began a relationship with her while I was her manager. The only person in the world I've ever begun a relationship with while I was their manager was Lottie, or perhaps you began it with me. I don't know.
Well, employee, not even management. The only employee you have ever started a relationship
That's
with
true.
is me.
Yeah.
And I can say that he's been such a gentleman that I'm marrying you.
And so, if the pandemic will fucking stop for 20 seconds,
well,
we can get
the idea, yeah. But the key thing is, I think a lot of people who heard those initial allegations 2 years later, if they listen to this podcast or they hear this on the internet, they will be astonished that this is a fact.
But I'm quite upset that that first tweet was immediately provably untrue. 15 seconds of Googling Olivia, I won't say her name because it seems to be Googling this person's name, LinkedIn, would have thrown up the fact that it was verifiably untrue.
Yeah.
And nobody who reported on it did the 15 seconds Googling. And again, I do have, not really sanctimonious about it, I do have some sympathy because I know the pressures and the deadlines that some journalists work under.
But this
but
is
for
your
Pete's
life.
sake, exactly, this is my freaking life.
Yeah.
And it's my life, and it's your life, and it's my mother's life, and it's your mother's life, and it's my kid's life, and it's our fucking cat's life.
And it's not been fun.
And it's not been
great. Well, it's interesting because, in the Me Too the Me Too movement or whatever, there were a lot of powerful people who were accused or who were, found guilty of abuse. But one of the things that, rigorous reporting involves with something like this, that is such a serious accusation, is, investigating the claims and finding real patterns, talking to, not just the accuser, but the accuser's friends. I mean, with a lot of these cases, you've seen very rigorous reporting that's involved in vetting accusers and finding out what happened before going to press at all. So it's always surprising to me when we see articles. I guess it's not surprising to me, not anymore. But we often see like these sort of these articles that come out the moment after some tweets are made without any sort of fact checking, without any sort of investigation whatsoever. And to base an entire article or blog post on, well, initially on some tweets and then often on some other article that they've read, it seems pretty irresponsible. Especially since, as you said, these are not we're not dealing with like major exposés on all the things that you've done. These are some tweets that are fairly vague. And so that I just don't understand the tendency that I see. I don't know if you followed the Hogwarts Legacy.
Oh God, yeah.
With
That's my first day of work, actually. Yeah, poor guy. And you said, well, you said it because it was your scoop, I guess, that they got the job title wrong, haven't they?
They did. I did too at first because I saw all these articles that described his job as a lead designer, and then he was actually just a senior. He was not just it, but he was a senior producer rather than a lead designer. I mean, he was at one point a lead designer on that game, but hadn't been for years. And so it's if you're seeing dozens of articles that are getting that kind of detail wrong, it's also like how many other details are they getting wrong? And this is just something we see over and over again, not just in the game press, but in the press in general, where a story will get picked up and then it'll be regurgitated over and over again and sort of expanded, and then we see a narrative around either a subject or a person or a story. That narrative forms, and the truth of it, whatever that truth is buried so deep under all these, echoing sort of doppelganger articles that it's impossible to find anymore. And so, so I am, as someone who observes this, but hasn't really been, in any kind of situation like you've been put through. It's eye-opening to see it from your perspective and what that experience must be like.
I think
envy you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I suspect a large part of it is the scoop, right? Because this stuff breaks on Twitter. Twitter is an ephemeral platform and people are talking about it. So if you want people to click on your article, it might be wiped off the face of the earth by tomorrow because it's social media. So you want to get in now. So I understand that. I do think it's telling that I was contacted by one journalist alone for an actual discussion of what had happened. And that journalist, I think, was the most prominent journalist in games at the time. And he asked me,
who that is, probably.
and he asked me
Yes, you've correctly guessed.
a number of questions, and I answered truthfully and cautiously. And I think it is very telling that he is the one journalist who did not then go on to write an article. And I suspect it was because the moment you look at the detail and the truth of what happened to us, and I'm not being sort of red stringy, the truth. I mean, like if you look at any kind of facts and details, the immediate sense is at least that it's a bit more complicated than it was presented as. And I suspect that once you've done that research as a journalist, you're much less likely to go ahead with allegations that you think maybe aren't necessarily totally backed up. Whereas if you don't do that initial research, you can quite happily say, well, this person says this on Twitter, so I'm just reporting what they say. I'm not actually kind of putting myself on the line as saying I kind of promote or endorse this story. And that doesn't really change the effect on us as the people who are subject of that horrible story. But I can see from the journo's point of view that you've got a time pressure and you maybe don't want to get too involved in something that's a bit icky because it is basically a sex scandal.
My ex-wife, who notoriously described me, she said, "You're a bit of a dick, but you're no abuser," which she's Croatian, she's very blunt. She used to work for the BBC, and she wasn't actually a reporter. She was on the tech side, but she said even there, and even this must have been 5-6 years ago now, there was a real debate about being right versus being first. And on one side, people were saying, and obviously largely won out, we are the most trusted news organisation in the world, and you can't regain trust once it's gone. And on the other hand, the people are saying, yeah, but being the most trusted news organisation in the world is worthless if nobody reads you. And if everyone else gets the news first, then they do. And I see that's a real temptation. But again, we come back to these are people's lives.
That's the thing. I would feel desperately uncomfortable making a game about something that I wasn't absolutely certain of. And I know a game is a longer term prospect, but this is our like article, I suppose. This is how we would get our stuff out there. And
I think I was going to say the other side of it is, so that's the carrot, that's why it gets reported on, and everybody gets a little. Now, again, that sounded quite cynical. I was going to say everybody gets a little buzz out of hitting retweet on this man's a monster. Some people, do get a little righteous buzz. Other people, I'm sure, genuinely believe they are spreading the word about I might jump out of a bush at any moment. I could be in that bush over there. And but the stick is that, and you will know this because you will have spoken to people on and off the record. Everyone's fucking terrified, and journalists as much as anyone. And so if somebody sides with someone who's unclean or has the wrong opinions, that can be career ending. And our overwhelming impression that, so the last 2 years have varied from shit to pretty much fine. And the shit bit has been, besides having the effect of mass public shaming has on your mental health is very hard to describe unless you've been there or unless you read John Ronson's excellent book on it. It's I've said before, I've been through a bad divorce and I've been through a close family suicide, and this was worse than either of those. There's just no competition, because everybody who you respect in the world is it's no fun, and I think in the end you took me to the GP, and I was sort of crying and incoherent and saying, please put me on some sort of pill. So they did, and I gradually got better. But after that we got, as Lottie says, every time we have some sort of success, somebody will pop up and try to ruin our day. So we got a grant from Creative Europe last year because they're making a narrative game about a library.
And I did all of the work on that grant, can I just say?
And Lottie did all the work on the grant, and when we got it.
But this is salient. It's a salient point. It's not just me banging my own drum. It's because when it was announced, we got the second nastiest round of press we've ever got, other than the initial coverage of the tweets back in 2019. We got a lot of game developers, some of whom we'd actually met in real life, but most of whom had never met either of us ever, rallying to convince the European Union to remove our funding because Alexis was a known sex offender. And like, none of that is true.
No.
And
I'm not a sex offender, and I'm not known to be a sex offender.
And it wasn't really anything to do with you. It's my studio as well. I'm a co-founder and I own the company as well. So it's my work that you're destroying through allegations about him that no one's bothered to investigate and aren't true anyway. And it was very, very, very upsetting.
But I think that no. I was going to say, what we have come to realise is that it looks like the internet hates you, and the internet doesn't hate you. A small number of very vocal people hate you, or say that they hate you because it gets them tweets or whatever. But we got, thank Christ. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, thank you. It really made a difference. We got 80, 100,
100 plus, definitely
100 plus messages, Twitter DMs, emails. I couldn't look at email for the first few weeks. I had to give Lottie my phone because
it was so shredding.
Yeah, but when we looked at it, all these people saying everything from "you seem to have been a bit of a naughty boy, but it doesn't look like you actually did anything bad." So people say, "Jesus Christ, I can't believe what's going on. This is insane." And I'm still your friend, and I still, believe you.
Yeah.
And a couple of people in the middle saying, "I don't know what to believe, and I think you should take a searching moral inventory," which I found difficult, but I can respect. And so, a couple of stories, being very careful not to identify the individuals in question. We got 2 people who worked.
I was going to say this.
You tell the story.
Oh, well, fortunately, I can't remember the name, so I'm absolutely sure bet to not reveal anybody. So we got 2 separate emails from 2 individuals in the indie game scene. One of whom I believe was the CEO of the company, or possibly COO, but somebody very senior.
C-level of a small studio, a small company.
Someone who I think was a programmer, or somebody who wasn't necessarily on kind of board level. And both of them said almost exactly the same thing, which was, privately, I think what's happened to you is horrible, and I'm really sorry, and I hope you're okay. I wish I could say this publicly, but I'm worried what my workplace will think if I express my opinion outwardly. And we were there, like, with these emails side by side, being like, you probably sit opposite each other in an office. Like, if you knew that both of you felt strongly about this. And I think one of the really telling things is that it's, what you're going to get if you retweet something that the internet likes. So if you retweet an allegation by a woman against a man, broadly speaking, everyone thinks that's a good act, and it's a kind of positive experience. If you retweet something counterculturally, often you come in for a lot of anger in response to that. So these people, who most of whom again we hadn't met, messaging us privately, they didn't know what we were going to do with those messages. We could have outed them. They put themselves on the line by saying something that would often get them fired, if not absolutely pilloried by the internet and kind of driven to out of the industry or possibly out of life. And they still felt strongly enough to message us. So as AK said, that really, really mattered at the time, because it reminded us that the horror that we were seeing online right now was not representative of the whole world.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks volumes about there being a significant majority, I would say, of people who feel that this is not necessarily the most productive way to resolve issues in games or anywhere else, but nobody is going to talk about it publicly, because why on earth would you put your head on that chopping block unless someone puts it there for you? Like, we've talked a lot about it. Obviously, we have very strong feelings about this is not helpful, or even if you did what you were accused of doing, it's such a horrible experience that nobody deserves this. But we have talked often about what we would do if we saw somebody going through the experience that we went through. And I think, honestly, we probably wouldn't necessarily say something publicly. And partly that's because we're covered in gasoline.
And there have been people,
but how terrible is that?
No, I know. I think, I mean,
I feel bad about that.
Now, I would absolutely say something publicly. And the only reason, there have been a couple of occasions when
I haven't really got anything else to lose.
Well, that's the thing. A couple of the people we've known have been cancelled, and I've offered my support. But in both cases, I'm thinking of, people have not necessarily wanted support from somebody else who might attract more lightning.
Yeah.
But I was just going to read one of the emails we got later on. This was about Christmas, when Lottie recorded a Christmas message to Indie Games.
I forgot about that.
Please, can we be nice to each other, everyone?
Could we just behave like adults?
Yeah,
that would be great.
Not be dicks. I just watched your video, Lottie, and agree with it. I thought what happened to you both, and also to my friend, to Alexis, was really awful. I'm one of many people who I've spoken to who did not join in because we knew what was going on was hideous. but I am also too cowardly to say what I think in public, so I'm also afraid of the mob, and my career depends on not stirring them up. Plus, I'm midway through a game that I've received funding for, and I cannot afford to rock the boat and cause a problem with that. Anyway, I'm sorry for my lack of support. I hope that you are both able to slowly heal and move forward in the best way possible. And, you know, I don't love getting an email like that from somebody who I had helped and supported in my time months after it happened. But I get them. And also, a lot of people didn't freaking know. I really might have turned out to have been seducing does young women. I think the one thing I do want to say is a shout out to Jonas Karatzis, the narrative designer and writer of the Talos Project and a bunch of other stuff. He's been an indie since there were indies, really. He's one of the very first. And he's built up a career by being talented and unusual, not giving a fuck what anyone thinks. Yeah. And he basically went on Twitter when the whole thing broke and told everyone they should be ashamed of themselves. And I think he's probably the only person who did that. And Jonas has been cancelled twice. And is a sort of small, fierce, brilliant Greek man, doesn't give a fuck. So,
yeah, I'm familiar with him. Yeah. I've interacted with him some on Twitter and whatnot.
He's fun, right?
Yeah, he is.
And he really doesn't have any patience for the purity mob.
I feel like, I think for some people, if they don't, if they're not afraid because they don't feel like they have anything to lose. Like they're going to, this is who they are, and they're not going to, back down from confrontation or, and they're not trying to be popular in the first place. And that's difficult. I'm sure when, it's difficult for journalists. It's because the press has become really kind of captured by this entire sort of, I don't say woke, but this whole mentality more than anything. Because I get messages that are very similar to this, to what you're talking about. Not because I've gone through anything like that, but because I write about things that are unpopular and from a perspective that is unpopular. And people, in game development, people in the press will message me and say, I really appreciate what you're writing about, and I appreciate you covering this. I can't say it publicly because of the, the same reasons that you guys are giving. And that to me is a little sad because I feel like, if more people, because what we end up seeing instead is the only people that do say anything or that do sort of speak out are really like vocal right-wingers who are, are doing their own, their own attempt at getting clicks, their own attempt at baiting and outrage, and their own, they're providing the sort of the opposite. But I think people who aren't the opposite, who just want decency and accountability and ethical behavior, and they don't want mob rule. I do think that at a certain point, people do need to say no more. Like, we are going to stand up to this, and I know that that's hard because when it's your job that's in question. That's really tough. You got to pay the bills. You've got to take care of your families.
We were this close. We were this close to losing our livelihoods. If Weather Factory had been a little bit less successful, then we would have lost our jobs. I'd be finding another way to feed my child.
I did read. Sorry, go
on. And one of the things, I think I was actually going to talk about what you read. So you say it.
Well, I was going to say I read a piece, I think, in one of the major British newspapers recently about a kind of retrospective on counterculture, or however you want to term it. And one of the things that really struck me was the fact that apparently, according to this journalist who isn't me, this sort of mob stuff inordinately affects kind of the little guy, because if it's a big celebrity, people have an emotional attachment to that person, which means, one, the full thing is covered. So we found that we got coverage of all the horrible stuff initially, and then nobody will ever talk to us ever again. So
because we're just famous enough to matter for a story, but not famous enough
for anyone to give a damn afterwards. But no one, yes. So we found that is true. Whereas if you're a big A-list celeb, a lot of people like you and kind of make excuses for your behavior. I mean, there are some things that people struggle to excuse. Like if there's a very specific allegation that's really horrible, obviously most people will be like, that's really bad. But if it's something that you were accused of, like just kind of being a bit of a rake and sleeping around and maybe you shouldn't have done that, then if you're, George Clooney, people are like, oh, but he's so handsome, or like, oh, but I loved him in that film.
Not that George Clooney's ever been accused of anything.
Not that George Clooney's ever done anything, because his wife is a very terrifying lawyer. So love you guys, you're great. But you know what I mean? Like people kind of find a way to kind of weave it into the mythology of those celebrities. celebrities. Whereas when you're actually a real person like us, who, as you say, are just, well, he's just big enough to matter, but not big enough to care about, then there's none of that. There's just, okay, we can throw that person by the wayside and it doesn't really matter.
I mean, I have mixed feelings when you say real person, because there are people who have been cancelled, who have been publicly shamed, who are, I'm sure, sociopaths who genuinely don't give a fuck and could just, live off the income from the interest from their last 5 movies and live in Malibu until the fuss dies down and not care. But I'm sure for every celebrity, as far as I know, is a human being who came out of another human being and has a functioning heart and brain. And maybe occasional exceptions, but that's the case. If you've got a million people screaming at you that you're shit and you should kill yourself, then
you start wanting to do that.
Yeah,
and you're right, and that's a good point for empathy. It wasn't quite what I was leading towards, though,
Yeah.
which is just that if you're big enough, you have a mythology that is often bigger than the
that's true.
negative stuff that you've got. Whereas I think the most press that we've ever received, the most views, has been about this allegation that isn't true. And it's very difficult for us as two people in a flat with a story that lots of people don't want to tell because it's kind of difficult, and a lot of people will get cross with them if they tell it. It's very difficult for us to build a new narrative, either that challenges the existing one and says this isn't true, or that just moves on and says, well, even if you were awful, which you weren't, but even if you were, you're now in a flat working with your fiance. So realistically, what women are in danger in this current situation? So that I think is particularly difficult. But I was going back to your point about it would be nice to see some more moderate voices talking openly about some stuff that maybe they didn't agree with. I had that direct experience myself because my personal monstering came out of me writing a response to this nastiness. Obviously, you wrote a specific rebuttal of the actual allegations, which I couldn't do because I'm not him and I wasn't there personally. But I did write a feminist's opinion on the experience of cancel culture and some major flaws that I had seen from being on the wrong side of it. And that really got under people's noses. A lot of people responded and said, this is the most sensible kind of commentary I've seen on the movement, and I'm really glad to basically hear somebody who isn't a sort of screaming Nazi say that maybe it's a bit more complicated than that. But obviously I got a lot of people, particularly women, I'm sorry to say, who were very angry at me and said I had betrayed women and that I was a bad feminist. And all I was saying was, this does not chime with my direct experience, which I don't think anyone could contravene. And I absolutely made a point of not being mean or aggressive or anything. And people just wouldn't have a controversial opinion. So, and
again, Erik, I really hear you when you say it's always the freaking right wing who do it. It's the screaming Nazis, his phrase. And I just, every time I hear your thankfully ex-president say, I mean, I'm assuming you're not a Trump voter. Is that
He's established he's a long-life Democrat.
Every time he says something about cancel culture, I'm like, oh God,
shut up!
You're
not helping.
No, I'm not. Yeah, and it's just, I think it has at least 2 effects. One is that a lot of the voices are freaking weird, and 2, you don't change people's minds by scolding them, and people get freaking radicalized. So I felt like after I'd been savaged, like if my, what are they called, medicine balls, those big weighted leather things that you toss around the place. I don't know, big pretend heavy things anyway. I felt like, my opinion's always been sort of firmly left liberal, and it's like somebody had wound up and they'd taken a really hard kick at it and it moved like an inch to the right. And I'm still left liberal, and I'm still anti-Brexit, and I voted Green all my
British
life,
liberal,
and British liberal, and
lefty,
lefty, and I still value religious tolerance and freedom of speech and social support for the less fortunate and redistribution of wealth and all those things. But it's just, it's really strange, the experience of feeling like my worldview being slightly adjusted. And if I had had less firm opinions, I think if there's one thing that will make you a screaming Nazi, it's people who say, you're a screaming Nazi, so we hate you. And then all the screaming Nazis going, yeah, fucking woke, come and have a beer with us. And that's how you do it. And I think it's not helpful to think that bad people are born, not made, and that either you get the good people or you get the bad people, and all we have to do is cancel all the bad people, and then we've got paradise, because that's Animal Farm, and that didn't end well.
Yeah, this whole idea of red pilling is interesting, right? To me, it's like, I don't think I've moved to the right at all. I think that what passes as the left has shifted, and I don't even think it necessarily more to the left. I think that the scolding, canceling, language policing, and all of that is a new form of politics that just doesn't really jibe with mine. You know, this idea that we should cancel games before they come out because they could potentially harm people is, you know, radical. It's a radical anti-free speech, anti-free expression position that I don't think has any place on the left. I mean, that's what the right did. That's what, you know, it was the right that was trying to ban video games because they were too violent, or they, you know, ban music, or, you know, all these things. That's a right winger.
This is it. I feel like we've had this conversation. We had it in the 80s. We had people saying you can't play D&D because the devil will get you. You can't listen to music because it will make you go out and have sex with people, and we can't let you read Marx because otherwise you might end up voting for the wrong party. And you know, it happened before that in the 50s with McCarthyism, and it happened with, you know, I guess with the left and the right wing in different ways in our country. But it is traditionally a right wing thing, and I think the desire to impose, not the desire to impose, the desire to identify people as undesirable and then exclude them socially is nothing to do with being liberal or left wing. It's just something that some people who identify as liberal and left wing do. But it's very hard to resist that because, you know, we don't reason through all our beliefs. Not everything I've ever espoused or voted for is a result of me sitting down and reading 3 books on political philosophy. Mostly it's you know, shit, that guy who I trust says that Brexit will be a bad thing. Well, I think he's probably right. Maybe I'm going to read up on it, but that's you know, where you get your opinions is from fellow travellers. And it's, you said at the beginning, I think, that, you know, the culture has changed. And it feels like, you know, a weather system has sort of moved on, and somehow those of us who actually care about the core tenets of not being shitty to people and allowing people to live their lives have somehow been left behind.
Yeah, it's a strange shift. I think it's really hard. I want to figure it out, and I'm not sure it's possible. I think that that it started in universities and has then seeped into the press and into the broader culture in general. I mean, and you see a lot of this sort of, it's a lot, it's mostly language, I think, and not much action. You see kind of the rise of this, I've heard people call it diversity incorporated, right? All these attempts by like big corporations to sort of act as though they're very you know, tolerant and woke and all this, and you know, and it's sort of, it's creeping into every single industry. I saw a publisher tweet the other day that if, you know, if they get a manuscript from an aspiring white man, they probably aren't going to get their book published because they're not looking for young white men anymore. And, you know, while I'm all for diversity and all for, you know, increasing opportunity for everyone, it's kind of a depressing outlook for the future for a lot of people, I think. So it's a weird, it's just, it's come almost out of the blue, but it's also been building, I think, for a while. And I think it's just perfect for social media. The dogpiling, the casting of villains. It doesn't matter if it's true. It just matters if the right people are saying it, you know? And if enough people say it over and over and over again, then that becomes the truth. And that's all that matters, regardless of whether there's any
I think
fact.
I used to be a lot more naive about social media, and it, you know, I'm quite biased because our lives were shredded by a social media based attack, but it's like an accelerant. It doesn't start the fire in itself, but it just means it goes very. If you had to write a letter by hand or type it and post it to denounce somebody or to complain to the local paper about something, then, you know, you really had to care. and you probably were going to stand by what you said. But if you're sitting on the toilet or standing on the train, looking at Twitter, and you see somebody who you admire or fancy or are afraid of denounce somebody, all you need to do is hit the like button. That's it. It's a half-second engagement, and you might never think about it again.
Yeah.
But the person who looks at the tweet where you've announced them, they will think about it, and that will change their life.
Well, I mean, so we've obviously thought a lot about what happened to us over the last 2 years, because we're still trying to escape it in basically every way. And I worked out that in the original cancellation in August 2019, there were around 10,000 people who were involved in your denunciation. And I don't think I'm going to meet 10,000 people in my life. I think that the amount of people who had any direct knowledge of anything that was discussed at all on any platform at that time,
people who'd been in the room or were the people who, or any of that, I
could count on one hand. But because the numbers were so big, because it blew up on Twitter, that gave it a lot of social proof. And a lot of people thought, well, this many people wouldn't be retweeting something. If occasionally you see a sort of mad post or a post that says something like, this person did something awful to me and it's got 5 likes, and you're a bit like, I'm not really sure what to think about that. But you see something that's got 500,000 likes and you think, I need to engage with this, because that must be something that everyone knows that I didn't, or that I suspected, and now I know is true. And it's it's such a sort of, it's just a different reality, because that is really convincing, but those people had no idea whether it was true or not. And yet, by just interacting with it, because they were on the loo, as you say, they lent it even more kind of credibility, even though that wasn't necessarily what they intended. And I'm certain that the vast majority of those 10,000 people haven't ever thought about you ever again. No. Because
I saw somebody who said, I'm a nobody and I live in Scotland, and I'd heard rumours about Alexis Kennedy, way back when, so it must be true. If I'd heard rumours, I mean,
they live in Arkansas specifically.
Oh, I changed the name because I didn't want to out them. But you probably do know this because it's such a fun fact. 4% of Americans, according to a public policy poll, believe that the world is ruled by shape-shifting reptilians who drink human blood. Now, so that's 12 million people. Now, I suspect, a lot of them just said it because lol, and a lot of them thought it said, you think reptilians in South America or something. And a lot of, some people are mentally ill, and some people are trying to fuck with the polars and all the rest of it. So probably not 12 million people actually have that as their considered opinion. But can you imagine, if 12 million people retweeted a tweet that said reptilians run the world, it would be difficult not to take it seriously, but it would be insane. And that's the problem with social proof, is that there's such a low bar to it getting started, and then once it's got started, it keeps on rolling. And I think you're right. Some of this started in universities, and it starts in universities because people are young, enthusiastic, and talk to each other. So it's very easy for ideas to get around and for people to be enthusiastic about them. When I was at university, I spoke to somebody at the Christian Union. And at that time, I was sort of a vaguely pagan-inclined atheist, and so we didn't have many ideas in common. But I said something about the virtues of keeping an open mind, and this person thought about it and said, with an absolute straight face, I don't think we're really supposed to have an open mind, because we already know the things that are right. And if we keep an open mind, then we might start believing the wrong things instead. And the thing is, if you subscribe to a worldview that says we have the truth and everyone else is wrong, then that's a rational thing to do, right? And if they got you early, if you're 19 and the Christians or the communists or the Nazis or whoever it is get to you and you soak it up, then it may take you 3 years to get out of it. You may never get out of it. But
this is true. Yeah, it's a little frightening. It's also why arguing with people online is so pointless 99% of the time. I wonder why I do it sometimes. I'm like, why are you arguing with people on Twitter again? They're not going to change their mind about this. Although sometimes, you never know. It does happen.
I think the thing is, for every person, and again, this goes back to our experience of the vocal minority of, I can't say haters anymore because Trump's
Cat.
Our cat just knocked over Lottie's guitar.
Sorry about that. Professional.
The Twitter angry, there's a minority of the shouting, majority of people just kind of going, well, what should we do? And it's often the people who are listening or watching who change their minds. You're not necessarily arguing with the person who's talking nonsense. You're saying things for everyone else.
And we have
most people don't. Right, most people aren't engaging. They're not arguing. They're not on Twitter. Most people are not participating in that. They're listening. They're observing or whatever. Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that one of the few rays of light that we have seen about this topic is that we have had a couple of messages since, in the last year, I would say, from people who explicitly said, at the time, I didn't know what to believe. So they neither stood up for us, and I don't know if they retweeted or liked anything, but they didn't say anything particularly horrible about us. But having seen how it's played out over the last 2 years or 1 year, whenever it was they emailed us, I now believe that this is at best a very negative portrayal of some facts that aren't that bad, and at worst totally wrong. And that encourages me, because it feels like people can change their minds, but just privately. And I guess where we need to get to is the ability for people to say something that they feel very strongly at the time, and then be able to change their minds without getting shouted at for changing their minds.
Yeah. How dare you consider that this opinion might not be immediately cancel worthy?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that I've seen convince some people so we've been very quiet about this for 2 years, because there are a couple of things that happened recently with projects of ours being sabotaged that made us decide to start talking about it, and also made us follow up with Fail Better to try to sort out mediation, because we thought after 2 years it would have gone away, and it's got better. It got a lot better, but it hasn't gone away. It still happens, and we've had besides people saying horrible things on Twitter, and when I say horrible things, I mean things like sex offender and rapist. And people have posted photos of my house, my old house. They couldn't get a photograph on. We've been stalked.
We've had poison pen letters. That was a big one.
We had what was it? Somebody posted a picture of my signature and a bunch of weird details from 25 years ago when I was standing as a local council candidate for the Green Party in Oxford. Whether to pretend they were me or to kind of show that they could get at myself, I don't know. Our community, somebody sent me a meme they developed to respond to when people like this pop up. They just say okay, and there's now, you've got a sort of motivational poster style image of just going okay, and stalkers coming in and yelling about me. But you've had people organised letter writing campaigns to the European Union to get our funding taken away. We've had people contact Steam and Apple and try to get us delisted from the storefront. I was terrified going back on Twitter, and I was encouraged to, because Lottie pointed out I should normalise it and start talking again.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, you're right. I think that arguing with people on the internet is not famously a productive way to spend your life. But one of the downsides of it, and we decided not to do it because it was just so upsetting. I mean, I would ask people listening to this to think about either being accused of something that they hadn't done, like Alexis was, or in my shoes, having their partner, the man they know and love, be accused of this. It's very, very hurtful. So the last thing we want to do is go on Twitter and argue with people we haven't met, who won't believe us anyway, about stuff that's really hurtful. But the flip side of not doing that, of leaving the internet to do its own thing, is that as it sort of becomes uncontested, which is sort of considered proof in a way. And
so again, that's things like unanswered allegations was the phrase when he came up in the press again with the petitions to Creative Europe, because we
have answered them.
Yeah, we have answered them.
We said they're not true, and then we've said, would anyone like to investigate? And then no one did. So yeah, it's difficult. So I would strongly advise people to not spend their life arguing with people on the internet, because it will wear them down and make them miserable and probably not have the impact they want. But it is a hard pill to swallow, a bitter pill to swallow, when you're kind of lending your detractors more ammunition by not engaging with it. But then, we were talking earlier about what you're supposed to do in a situation like this when the internet comes for you, is you're meant to be on subreddits at 3 a.m. posting WhatsApp screenshots from 5 years ago in response to a Medium post that someone wrote, that you're going line by line saying receipts.
Yeah.
And like, to be honest, I'm not doing that. I'm a 31-year-old woman. I have better things to do with my life than any of this. But if you don't do that, the internet's like, but then they mustn't have anything to say.
But again, of course, it's not the internet. It's 3% or 5%, whatever it is, of the internet who are all shouting. And
everyone else is going,
there was I saw somebody else point out that one of the things about Twitter is that if you stand up in a room and say, and to be clear, there are quote marks around the next phrase, Hitler had some good ideas about the Jews, which I do not believe. Please don't take that out of context. If you stand up in a room and you say that, then people will look at each other and go, what the fuck? And somebody will probably tap you on the arm and say,
you've had enough, mate.
You've had enough to drink. But if you say that on Twitter, and you're not a big name, you probably get a couple of likes from passing loonies, and very few people will say, sorry, what are you talking about? So you get a different kind of reaction. If you say something outrageous or aggressive, you only see the positive reinforcement. You don't see the negative reinforcement. And again, I think that helps things get rolling. But the other thing I want to say, I promised earlier I was going to talk about having been skanky and silly. And Lottie looks along.
Never miss up an opportunity.
Yeah. So here's one of the other things about the situation that is a freaking missed opportunity to do well. So I said earlier that I continued a relationship with someone after I hired them, and that was a mistake. And it was a mistake, but having taken some time to think about it, it wasn't the mistake. The mistake was that I didn't, when I founded Fair Better Games, put a policy in place about workplace relationships. And the thing is, it's one of those things that you never think you'll need until you need it. And by the time you need it, it's too late. And if else, when I found a Fair Better, it was me. I mean, it was literally me in a room. And then I got a mate to do some art. And that was it. And then we got 3 more friends in. And it just, it wasn't a thing. And much later, when we became a quote proper company, unquote, I paid a lawyer, I paid 2 lawyers actually, to put together a staff handbook full of things about maternity leave, paternity leave, compassionate leave, sick leave, grievance procedures, all the rest of it. And nobody thought to say workplace relationships. But here's the rub. If the person who I had this on-off, thing to me and came to me and said, in fact, they said quite often, give me a job, I want to work in games. And eventually I said yes, because we needed an editor and they're a good editor. And to be clear, they were a good hire and they improved the quality of every project they worked on, even though they're not on my Christmas card list anymore. But the moment they said, give me a job, and we were sleeping together, I could have been in trouble and so could they. If I said, I'm not giving you a job because we're sleeping together, then they might have said, this is discriminatory hiring based on a protected characteristic. If I'd said, I'm going to give you a job, but you have to stop sleeping together, then they might have said, well, that's not fair. If I'd said, I'm going to give you a job, but we have to tell everyone in the company, they could quite easily have said, I have a right to privacy. It's a human right, and how dare you? But if I'd said, look, there is a rule in the company that says you cannot date co-workers, and or if you date co-workers, you have to declare it publicly, and or you have to declare it to at least one other person, and that's the basis that it's going to be on. That would have been difficult, but survivable when we broke up later. And as it was, we just assumed, like a billion other people freaking assume, that it's going to be fine until one day it's not. Yeah. Because when relationships end, sometimes people behave badly. And I behaved badly. I hurt her and started going out with someone else. And I lost my thread. But I think that's the thing is in creative industries, games, film, art, theatre. I mean, theatre don't even be started on theatre. Humans, one of the reliable features about humans is that they like banging other humans. I mean, sometimes things that aren't human as well, but I don't judge.
So I think the key thing is that in games, like I would say, not necessarily the majority, but I would say possibly the majority of people find their life partner or certainly date within the industry because it's a creative hobby. It's something we care about as well as what we do. You're thrown together in situations and you care about the same stuff. So it's absolutely natural that you would tend to meet people who had similar, interests to yours and form a relationship. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. I certainly the vast majority of women in games that I spoke to and have spoken to have had wonderful experiences with people they've dated. And of course you date people and you dump them and you're cross with them afterwards because that's very human and that's how relationships happen, right? But I think sort of pathologizing the idea of any relationship in games as a potential abuse kind of niche is a really bad thing to talk about because it doesn't help. It doesn't mean that people who are going to take advantage of other people in a relationship are going to stop doing that. And all it does is discourage people from potentially falling in love and having a wonderful experience.
And that's the thing, you can say don't date co-workers, and I think it's wise to show restraint and discretion. But if you fall in love with somebody who you're working alongside, if you both are working in a job that you are passionate about, and you both respect each other and you both spend time together, what is it? 1 in 4 relationships start in the workplace, something like that.
And we had a quite formative experience, or I certainly did. When we got together at Fail Better, we made a point of telling the deputy CEO, so the next most senior person other than Alexis, immediately, because you didn't want to have any problems with allegations of misconduct. And I certainly didn't want people thinking I was sleeping my way to the top. So we thought, just get it super out in the open. And we deliberately didn't tell everybody. One, because it would be weird to be like, hey guys, we sleep together now. But mostly because we didn't want to hurt the feelings of this other woman that had just been dumped and had to work with these 2 people, which, obviously put her in a difficult position. So we were trying to be nice, but trying to be careful at the same time. And I was very disheartened to hear that one of the board members, when she was informed of our relationship, her immediate reaction was,
this is why we were both still there, to be clear.
Yeah, her immediate reaction was, can Lottie leave the company? That was the solution. Now, on paper, it would be ideal if we were not working together, if we decided to, pursue a relationship, because there is potential for complications later down the line. But things as they were, you weren't going to leave because you were the CEO. I had just got basically my dream job working in a studio that I'd admired for years. And it felt bad to think that I would have to change my life and career and, not be able to pay rent and go through all that pain because there wasn't any other way of dealing with the problem. And I think we've both spoken about, I don't know if you read about Mr. McDonald's. I don't know what his name actually is, but I think he was the CEO of McDonald's. And he recently got in a bit of a scandal and had to step down because he had turned out to be having a relationship with a junior employee in his company. And as far as I'm aware, there was no allegation of misconduct or abuse, but he was in direct violation of a company policy that clearly said you're not allowed to have a relationship with an employee. And as a result of that, he said, you're right, I'm sorry, and he left, and that was kind of it. And I think if that had been the case with you and Fail Better, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now.
And the fucking tragedy of it is that this happened, and by the time you left Fail Better a year later, there was still no policy in place. I don't think there is to this day.
No.
So the lesson to learn from it is not, I would submit, Alexis is a radioactive presence who jumps out of bushes at women, and now he's gone. We don't need to worry about it. It should be, Jesus, that was a mess. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But as a result of it being a ridiculous sex scandal, the message everyone takes away is if we just manage to remove all the bad apples, then nobody will ever have a relationship at work again. And if they do, it won't be a problem, which is
just not how reality
works.
Yeah, human nature is what it is, for sure. And the cancel culture thing that always bothers me is what does it actually achieve? Like you're saying, like remove all the bad apples. That's not possible. Like what does cancel culture bring? Some justice to the world, some fundamental justice that actually changes structural injustices in society? Not really. I mean, if you do find a real, there are some obviously very bad people who have, been taken down by witnesses who have come forward. I would say like Bill Cosby and Jeffrey Epstein, and there are some, some awful people out there. But for the most part, like canceling people because you disagree with them, canceling people because you've heard rumors, or it's a pretty destructive tendency that I don't know how we're going to fix that. In terms of like what you've been through the last couple of years, looking back in retrospect, do you have any advice for people going through a similar thing, like how you coped with things, how you could have coped with things
yes.
better? Yeah.
So a top number one advice is, and I've spoken to other people who are, as it were, in council club, and they've fallen. Some of them manage to do this, some of them don't. Everyone benefits from it. Don't look at the fucking internet. Don't go looking for things about you, because right now, if you have, unless you live in a cave and you see another human being, someone is probably talking shit about you. Somebody's probably saying things that aren't true about you, things that would really upset you if you heard about them. But the thing about Twitter, or the internet generally, is you can see it. And there have been times when I've been silly enough to Google my name and I have found something that ruins my week. And I haven't really learnt anything. All I've done is feed a bad habit. And it's so easy to say, well, someone's being shitty about you on Twitter, just don't look at your phone. But stuff gets its hooks into you.
Well, and it has a actual implication on real life.
Well, that's the thing. So just the psychological side of it, I think the thing is never go looking. Never go looking. It will find you, and if it doesn't, you've nothing to worry about. And the other side of it, of course, is the impact on real life, which you were talking about.
I don't have any good advice on that, though. That just sucks.
Yeah.
Like, don't get cancelled. That would be my advice. It's really bad. I mean, the big thing that we struggled with, I think it would be worse if you were actually guilty of what you were accused of. And we were really open at the beginning to the idea that Alexis and I had just like totally misunderstood the situation, and he had actually acted in a way that was really horrible, and we just somehow hadn't realised that. So we were open to theoretically.
I mean, I wasn't saying I was open to it so much as I couldn't stop thinking about it.
But I think it's important because obviously, if you're in a situation like we were in, something has gone wrong somewhere. Because that stuff doesn't happen like every day, right? So something has gone wrong somewhere, and I think in our instance, it was basically a runaway train of rumours that happened to be in the right place in the right time, and it just kicked off. But as you have pointed out, Erik, there are some people who are guilty of what they have been accused of online. And I think if you want to be a good person, then if somebody comes up to you and critiques you, you need to be open to that critique theoretically. That's all handy dandy. But what it felt like after we had soul searched and realized that really, no, this was absolutely mad and it was getting out of control, and nothing that you were being described as was true, was that our reality, the reality of our everyday, the reality of our egos, and I mean that in like psychological terms, not our sense of how great we are, but the sense of who we are, were being challenged by thousands of people, which is a really compelling challenge to your sense of self. And I certainly felt shredded. I felt that everything I thought I was, my entire identity as a sort of left-leaning, kind feminist, the internet was telling me I was some sort of monster, and that didn't chime. There have been people who don't like me, but nobody in my life has been like, when you like kick that old lady in the vagina, like that was bad and I hate you for it. Like that's because I don't do stuff like that, right? So what I think the most difficult thing for people going through something like a cancellation is this like total challenge to your absolute sense of self. And I think if you are in the wrong place or you don't have the support network in place, that stuff annihilates you. And I think that is why some people kill themselves after this experience.
And this is why it's so shredding, because a lot of what we had thought was our support network turned out to be
not our support network, because they couldn't go public. So the positive spin on this, which otherwise is just miserable, is if you are in a situation where the internet is against you, go and speak to people who are not on the internet, who know you. And I don't mean just your friends who will come around with a bottle of wine and say, oh my God, poor you, have some more. But I mean people in your everyday life, like go out and talk to people in the park, or like go to the shops and like just interact with normal humans. And you'll notice that you don't get the reaction from them that you get from the internet. When we go to the shops, we have a perfectly polite, natural interaction with other humans, and we go about our day. And every time I have something like that, it reminds me that I'm not this horrible, awful person that the internet sometimes wants me to feel like. And it's a very useful challenge to the narrative that is spun by Twitter, whether or not that's deliberate. I don't think most people involved in the cancellation want to hurt you or me. I think they just involve themselves in a fun drama.
I couldn't go to the shops initially.
I know,
because
so
I was
awful.
sort of somehow convinced that people would have seen what he said about me, and I wouldn't be able
and that's
to.
what it does. It warps your reality.
And I think, like Lottie says, people who are outside the bubble, who aren't, the phrase I've heard is Twitter poisoned. The reaction we keep getting is we'll talk to friends and say, how are things? Or say, pretty good. The cat hasn't jumped out of the window lately, but that bullshit from 2 years ago is still causing us problems. And they'll be like, I'm sorry, what, still? But how is this? What is even? And the answer is, there's several dozen people who've decided that it's quite a fun blood sport, so they keep on kicking off. But my ex-wife told a friend of hers about the whole thing, and the friend just couldn't get their head around it. Ex-wife kept saying, he was accused of misconduct because, and the friend's like, okay, so he had an affair with this woman. Yes. So, but what's the actual accusation? And my ex was, okay, well, he slept with her. Yeah, but what's the accusation? She said it was there, and it. I think sometimes people have to work quite hard to continue to maintain their belief in devils. What other useful advice have you got?
I've got one other bit, which is, like I said earlier, what you're supposed to do in a situation like this is write some sort of incredibly raw 8-page blog post and post it across all your forums and respond to everyone and get really involved, which is not advisable for your mental health. But the key thing is that Alexis and I decided very early on that despite the fact that people were saying really outrageously vile things about both of us online, we were not going to respond in kind. We were not going to get into the fray. We were not going to insult anybody we'd worked with. And we're basically going to maintain our class, rather than getting into it and saying, well, you shouldn't believe that person because they did this to me 5 years ago and therefore you can't trust them, because that's just, I think it's childish and that's not the person I want to be. And at the time, that was a very difficult thing to do, because obviously the urge to defend yourself when people say horrible things is huge. But now we're 2 years on. We were saying before this podcast, this is the first time we've talked openly about this experience because it's so sort of dicey and upsetting. And one of the things I'm deeply grateful for is that I don't feel we need to be careful or clever with the things that we say, because we haven't done anything that will come out, like we didn't post under false accounts, like sliding some information into important forums, and we didn't say anything nasty about anybody that we then deleted but might be saved in the Wayback Machine, this kind of stuff. We were basically just like normal humans, and at the time that was frustrating, but in hindsight we can now go ahead on really firm ground because we never behaved like a lunatic, and that actually is really useful. So if, for example, we do go through some sort of mediation or some sort of even legal proceedings, and to be clear, I think that's almost impossible and we don't want to do it anyway, but if we go through any kind of proceedings set in place by any adults, not having behaved like a lunatic is a really good place to start.
And I think one of the the rule I've seen is always behave. I can't remember where I saw this, or I would attribute it. Always behave is everything you write down, paper, electronic font, whatever, might someday appear in 48-point font on the wall of a courtroom, because it actually might. And I feel confident. I think probably if somebody shared some of my more intimate messages with romantic partners, I'll be embarrassed. But that's as far as it goes. I haven't said anything I'm ashamed of. And props to Lottie. I think I would have if it hadn't been for you, because the number of times I was furious and had to be talked down from posting things I regretted.
And you did sacrifice your mental health for it.
And every time I've done it, I've been glad. So just. And what we have done more than once, they'll never see the light of day, but there have been numerous documents where I went line by line through somebody monstering me and said, and another thing, just to get it out of my freaking system. And then I consigned it to the recycle bin. Thank God, because by the time you end writing it, you feel cheap and dirty anyway.
Yeah.
But it did help get it out of my system a couple of times.
And the flip side is, the stuff we've seen on social, I had the very unenviable task of going through and collating a lot of this stuff for the people we were asking advice from, from lawyers and PR people and marketers and mental health people who just were like, I'm sorry, what the hell is going on? Could you please provide some sort of map? So I focused entirely on the company, Valbetter, and their employees, the people at the centre of this, and focused only on Twitter. And I have a 42-page document of really horrible things that people have said about us, and they haven't got anything.
It's actually 42 pages.
It's actually 42 pages long, and they haven't got anything that we've said about them because we made a point of not being dicks. Yeah.
I did apparently tweet menacing poetry at someone.
You did.
Yeah.
Did.
I've never heard of menacing poetry before.
So
I'm fascinated by this concept.
Is it worth getting into it?
I wouldn't. I mean, I think it was a sort of jokey tweet before the allegations hit.
Yeah.
That in hindsight can be portrayed as threatening poetry, but to be clear, I think it's poetry that you wrote for Fall in London, and involves fictional characters. It's not like you did a rhyming couplet which rhymes with gun.
Yeah, I tweeted in character from a Twitter account that I had kept.
It was an in character tweet, so I feel not that worried about that coming back to haunt you.
I think there is one other thing which comes to what Lottie said, which is in terms of advice, is very much, I wouldn't have started from there.
Yeah, don't get cancelled, guys.
But one of the ways, just fucking talk to people. So we did do some of this. We did try to talk to a couple of the people involved early on, and it didn't work. But here's an example. So one of the pebbles that started the avalanche, I think, was that a year after I'd left, Fail Better laid off a bunch of people that they shouldn't have laid off in a very clumsy way 2 days before the Christmas party. And I had actually gone to one of the board and spoken to them about it ahead of time, because I could see that there was something going on, and I wanted to encourage them to do something differently. And even though I was then no longer part of the company, everyone there was still my friend, and it's very hard to step away emotionally for a company you put 7 years of your life and a marriage into. And because my ex, absolutely says a startup killed the marriage. And when they laid people off anyway, a bunch of those people went to the press and said they'd been shabbily treated. And Eurogamer published an article about it, quoting people. Eurogamer came to me and asked if I had anything to say about it, and I did. And I was the one person who went on record. Everyone else was a source. Everyone
was anonymous.
Was anonymous.
Yeah.
So I think Fail Better probably thought that I sort of whipped up the whole thing for whatever motive I don't know. And I think if one of them had come to me and said, "For fuck's sake, Kennedy, why did you talk to the press?" then I would have said, "Well, the press talked to me, and I was left with the choice of either lying or staying silent or speaking but not giving my name, or saying the stuff that I'd already said back channel to you." And I wonder how things would be different if they had asked me that question. We'll never fucking know. But I think once you get the battle lines drawn, once you get people deciding other people are devils rather than humans, it's very, very hard to go ahead and have the conversation, which is why we are struggling with getting mediation out of Fail Better, of course. And if you talk earlier, I can't tell you, I mean, you know this, right? You've been in the world. The number of times you've had a really serious argument with somebody, and it turns out that you've been arguing for 2 hours because one of you literally misheard a word that the other used.
Oh, yeah.
And if you just sorted it out, this shit happens. And if it happens in a room, it sure as shit happens on the internet. So that's my advice, is just fucking talk to people before it's too late.
I mean, it's all good advice. And stay classy, communicate. Don't live your whole life on the internet. It applies to everything.
Is my spirit animal. Stay classy is my mantra.
Yeah, I mean, I think this applies to, even if you aren't canceled, if you're just in a relationship, if you're dealing with other people in the world, trying to not say horrible things and not be a total ass is never a bad idea.
It's just once you've said something, you can't unsay it.
Right.
But if you haven't said it, you can always still say it.
And of course, we're all humans, so we all make that mistake from time to time. I mean, I think the just being in a relationship with another person, we've all said things we regret saying, and it's hard. It's a hard lesson to learn. Hopefully, you learn it over time. I think the problem that we see with the internet, of course, is that you literally can't take things back. It's all there. It's all documented forever, and people that you love may be forgiving, but people that you don't even know and don't know you, they have no incentive to be forgiving or to be kind or, to be, to listen. So yeah, I mean, it's quite an ordeal, it sounds like. And I'm glad that things are better for you guys now, even if it's not, all better. And I'm glad that you're out talking about it now, because I think it is such an odd story, because unlike some other stories, there just isn't much in terms of concrete allegations, or it is a little hard, reading over some of the stories about this and your blog posts, your statements. It's kind of like, okay, it is a little hard to puzzle out what exactly the story itself is, other than the story that became the story based on sort of the exaggeration around it and the rumor around it, which does make
That's a
it
really good way of putting it. I don't even know what to deny, because it is the story of the story rather than the story.
It's very vague, and it sort of takes on its own life, its own shape. I mean, because there certainly are other stories out there about other people that are very, very concrete, or that have a lot of backing, or many some people have 16 different accusers, and you can really establish some sort of pattern. And but in this case, it's really nothing like that. But it's incredible that even when there's something like this, how huge the impact on people's lives can be. I wish that people would be more careful before they go around spreading rumors and spreading these kind of stories. And I do wish that in my profession we would have more, a lot more cautiousness and care about the impact on, and the impact on not just the accused, but sometimes also the accusers. There's been some. I don't know if you've seen what's going on with Kotaku pulling a certain story about.
About one of the other people got accused at the same time as me.
Yeah,
I tried to stay away from industry news full stop these days, but I did see that.
The accuser had been trying to get them to pull that article for years, and that was another whole interesting story, but not a very pleasant one.
I mean, I don't get the sense that anybody who actually starts, it's quite rare for people who start these call outs to end up being glad they did. I think a lot of people do things in the heat of the moment, and then.
Well, I think the problem is there just isn't any resolution. I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to do after cancellation. I don't know what anybody is supposed to do. The accuser, the accused, whether you're guilty, whether you're innocent. Because, one of the things that we had said to us when we were talking to people who weren't on the internet, when all of this was really happening, was we'd say, AK's been falsely accused online and it's awful. And people would say, is there a court date? And we'd be like, well, he was accused of sleeping around with like two people that he did, but consensually. So no, there's not a court date. And there just isn't any way to resolve it unless you are able to work with the people who have said that you've done something bad, to either make amends if you have done something bad, or to straighten out miscommunication, or just something, and so it just sort of lies there like a sort of corpse in the middle of the room, and everyone just sort of moves the furniture around it. And I think that goes, if I had accused somebody of doing something bad, I would want a resolution. I want them to apologize. I'd want them to make amends somehow, and then I want to move on. So I'm sure that's how people feel who have said bad things about you. And I certainly know that from our point of view, we want to be able to move on and do our jobs and not get shouted at every time we do anything. And I'm sure this is true of every cancellation, regardless of the details. And I'm sure, I don't know, I just think resolution is the really big missing.
I think there's one more apology I want to make. I did apologise at the time and then later to the lady in question for having hurt her and ended a relationship clumsily. I did apologise implicitly, and I take responsibility for not having put a policy in place about workplace relationships, which, because I was CEO, is my failure. And somebody else accused me of flirting with her mother at her wedding, and I would like to apologise for that, because I didn't know that would upset her. So that was part of the call out, was that I flirted with somebody's mother at their wedding, and I think that was obviously a bad thing.
I've had people's mothers flirt with me. That's good.
Well, I think it was.
You deserve
I'm not getting into this.
Yeah, right in front of my girlfriend too. I don't know what it is.
I think it's 3 glasses of wine, probably.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I'm not being personal.
So
I just think at weddings, the wine is going to flow.
That's true.
Sorry, that sounds really bitchy.
Anyways, I think that's all the time that I've got for today, but I really appreciate you guys coming on here and sort of saying your piece. And
well, thanks for talking to us, and thanks for writing the stuff you write, because you're doing good work.
Breath of fresh air.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I wish you guys the best of luck with trying to get the mediation going and hopefully getting your story out there more. And like you said, resolution is always great. I mean, I don't know why people don't want that more, like resolution. That's it. What a good objective to have.
Right.
But I do have one more thing to say about advice, very briefly, which is just, it's actually something, 2 things Lottie's father said to me.
Oh God.
Yeah. One is that reputations are much more resilient than people imagine, and that, after the storm has passed, often people remember the other 30, 40, 20, whatever it is, years of your life. But the other thing is, think of the worst thing that could happen to you, or the worst things happen to a friend. If you're paralyzed and your significant other leaves you and your children die, that's about as bad as it gets. That's a 10. So what is this? Is it a 9?
Yeah.
Is it a 7? And what happened to us was about an 8, I think. I think it was an 8 rather than the end of our life.
Mhm.
Was surprisingly helpful, and it does pass. It takes 2 years to get over a death. It takes 2 years to get over a divorce. I think it basically takes 2 years to get over something like this. So that's my advice. Think of what a 10 would be and count down from there.
Right. And then have patience and get help and
a gin.
The therapist and some, a fifth and Well, great. Well, thank you so much. It was great to meet you guys, and I look forward to seeing. I guess is there anything you want to talk about upcoming projects or anything we should be looking forward to in that realm?
Well, we announced a TRPG of Cultic Simulator called The Lady Afterwards, which is coming up in October, and we're working on Book of Hours, our next game. But that won't be out for a couple of years. But you can subscribe and hear all our fun stuff in the interim.
And I wrote a book. I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want to sound too shilly. But if you Google me and the word book, then you'll find it. Hooray!
Against Word Building is the name of it.
Whatever.
Okay, interesting, cool. And online, where can people find you?
You can find us on www.weatherfactory.biz or on Twitter for our sins at Factory Weather, or just Google Weather Factory and you'll find all of our stuff.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks so much, and I will talk to you guys again soon, hopefully.